Did you know that only 54% of Americans have a positive view of capitalism? That's the lowest rating for capitalism that we've seen in recorded history. So today, I'm going to talk about one of the filthiest words in the English language, socialism.
Political bear nation ready to dive, where opinions spark and the debates thrive. Hold on tight.
Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Brown Chubby Bear, and this is Political Bear Nation. Listen, I'm not going to be advocating for a full-on socialist or communist government, nothing like that. But I do want to explain these systems of government so you can understand why democratic socialism has gained so much traction and what it would mean for you. Let's start with the basics, because if we're going to have this conversation, we need to be clear about what we're actually talking about. Socialism is an economic system where the workers collectively own or control the means of production. That means factories, businesses, and resources are distributed more equally instead of them simply going to the richest 1%. Contrary to popular belief, socialism is not about taking away your stuff. It's about changing who benefits from a successful economy. You would still own your house, your car, your business, and all of your other personal property and possessions, but major industries and essential services like healthcare, energy, education, and transportation would be publicly owned or operated for the public good, instead of being run like a for-profit business that only cares about the bottom line. That's socialism. Now, a lot of people use the term socialism and communism interchangeably, but they are very different. Communism advocates for a classless society with no private property at all. Keep in mind, true communism, as Karl Marx envisioned it, has never actually existed. It is simply a theory. When most people think of communism, they are actually thinking of brutal dictatorships like Stalin's Soviet Union or Mao's China. Those were not communist societies. They were actually oppressive regimes where the state controlled everything, and elite members of a single political party made rules for everyone else. However, Marx envisioned a moneyless, stateless utopia where all property was publicly owned and everyone was equal. That has never existed, and most political experts believe it never will. Now we can get to democratic socialism, which is what I consider myself to be, and that's what Bernie Sanders, AOC, and Zohran Mamdani support. To many, socialism is a filthy word, but it really shouldn't be. Democratic socialism is actually a combination of capitalism and socialism. In this system, you keep the free market economy, private businesses, innovation, and competition, but you also add a strong social safety net and regulations to make sure everyone has access to healthcare, education, housing, and a decent standard of living. Think of countries like Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland. That's democratic socialism. Whether you realize it or not, you benefit from socialist policies right now. Take, for example, Social Security. It's literally in the name. Medicare, public schools, and even the fire department. These are all things paid for by tax dollars and are provided publicly without profit being the motive. It is provided to everyone for the public good. Another example of this would be liberal Nebraska. Now, I'm joking here. 59% of Nebraska voted for Trump. But what you may not know is that Nebraska is the only American state where every single electric utility is publicly owned. That means the people own the power, literally and figuratively. It's not shareholders and investors looking to make a profit that run Nebraska's electric utilities. It's the people. Funny how you never hear conservatives call Nebraska's energy program socialist or even communist. Weird, right? Nebraska consistently has some of the lowest electricity rates in the country. When a profit does occur, instead of profits going to investors, Nebraska's utilities reinvest back into their communities for things like renewable energy projects, as well as local charities for food banks and youth scholarship programs. Conservatives would have you believe that the United States is one of the only pure capitalist societies on the entire planet.
America, fuck yeah!
And that they are fighting to keep it that way. But that's simply not true. The United States is actually a mix of capitalism and socialism already. What democratic socialists in America want to do is make the wealthy pay their fair share so that we can expand social services like healthcare and affordable housing so that the economy works for everyone, not just the 1%. So why do conservatives keep trying to tell you that socialism is a dirty, dirty word?
That sounded naughty.
Well, historically, that is what conservatives and even what some corporate Democrats have done, going all the way back to the 1930s when the country was trying to redefine itself after the Great Depression. The American Liberty League, which was made up of wealthy business leaders, called many parts of FDR's New Deal dangerous socialism. The League consisted of executives and family members from huge corporations like General Motors, DuPont, Standard Oil, Chase National Bank, Goodyear Tire, and the Ford Motor Company. As a rebuttal to FDR's 1936 State of the Union, former New York Governor Al Smith said, "It is all right with me if they want to disguise themselves as Karl Marx or Lenin or any of the rest of that bunch. But I won't stand for allowing them to march under the banner of Jackson or Cleveland. There can be only one capital, Washington or Moscow. There can be only one atmosphere of government, the clear, pure, fresh air of free America or the foul breath of communistic Russia." Now, that's pretty harsh, so why were they so mad? Well, one of the many pieces of legislation that FDR passed was the Revenue Act of 1935. FDR wanted heavier surtaxes, not just on large individual incomes, but also on inheritance, gift taxes, and a graduated scale for corporate taxes and dividend payouts, specifically targeting the super rich. If you made $5 million in 1935, you paid a tax rate of 63%. But after FDR's legislation was passed, you paid 79% of your income to the federal government. Now, mind you, the average annual income in 1935 was still less than $1,400. So if you made under $1,000, you paid no taxes at all. But this made the rich pay a lot more, which is completely fair. But they didn't want to pay it, so they used good old-fashioned fear-mongering, and that still holds true today. FDR said, "If a government is to be prudent, its taxes must produce ample revenues without discouraging enterprise. And if it is to be just, it must distribute the burden of taxes equitably. Our revenue laws have operated in many ways to the unfair advantage of the few, and they have done little to prevent an unjust concentration of wealth and economic power." FDR was addressing the same thing that democratic socialists like Bernie Sanders and AOC are trying to address today: wealth inequality. The American Liberty League was not very different from organizations like Americans for Prosperity, which was funded by the Koch brothers, who wanted to stop President Obama's healthcare plan and his re-election. Think of Irénée DuPont as the 1935 version of Charles Koch, and it was DuPont who actually founded the American Liberty League specifically to stop the implementation of FDR's New Deal and to stop his re-election. DuPont executives and family members were the largest contributors, donating more than $280,000, which today would be more than $6.6 million. All major industries were represented in the league: banks, oil, railroads. While they didn't have political television ads like we do today, they produced over 135 pamphlets with provocative titles like "Is the Constitution for Sale?" and sponsored numerous attack ads on the radio against FDR. They created 26 chapters in colleges and universities to help spread the message that FDR's policies were unconstitutional and dangerous socialism. Sound familiar?
What exactly about socialism do you not like?
Like the 130 million people that died under socialism in the last 100 years. The fact that every country that engages in a socialist direction becomes less free, less prosperous.
I know that in Italy, I believe they have 8 weeks paid vacation, maternal leave.
Yeah, it's a terrible idea.
Now, the story does not end there, and fair warning, it gets much, much uglier. Protecting profits is the reason why DuPont created the American Liberty League, but he financed other organizations that were upset with Roosevelt, and he didn't care how disturbing their beliefs actually were. The Southern Committee to Uphold the Constitution was founded by Vance Muse and partially funded by Irénée DuPont. Muse's own grandson called Vance, and I quote, a white supremacist, an anti-Semite, and a communist baiter, a man who beat on labor unions, not on behalf of working people as he said, but because he was paid to do so. Vance Muse is known for being the father of right to work. Right to work laws have been passed in 26 states as of 2025, and they let people benefit from union protections without requiring them to pay union dues, which makes unions weaker. And when unions get weaker, everyone's pay goes down, not just union members. And that's the goal of many big businesses because they want to lower their labor costs. He did not like unions, and he sold his anti-union agenda to segregationists in the South. Here's what he said about Roosevelt's labor proposals. White women and white men will be forced into organizations with black African apes, whom they will have to call brother or lose their jobs. The history of right-to-work laws and other anti-union legislation stems from this racist jackass from Texas. He fought against the 8-hour workday, against women having the right to vote, and even against child labor laws. But for this story, what's important to know is that he is the one that formed the Southern Committee to uphold the Constitution in 1934 specifically to stop FDR's re-election campaign. That is the historical origins of all of the anti-labor policies that conservatives promote today. Now, let's get back to the present day. In the United States, there are 902 billionaires with a combined wealth of $7.6 trillion. That's a 160% increase in wealth since 2017. The wealth held by the top 1% of households stands at approximately 31%. In contrast, the bottom 50% of American households collectively only have 2.6% of the nation's wealth. And here's what makes this even worse. These billionaires are paying a lower effective tax rate than you and me. The effective tax rate for the wealthiest Americans fell from 30% in 2017 to just 23.8% in 2020. Meanwhile, the average American pays an effective tax rate of 30.2%. Think about that. If you're a teacher, a nurse, or a construction worker, you're paying a higher percentage of your income in taxes than Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, or Larry Ellison. Now, conservative media wants you to blame illegal immigrants and welfare recipients for living off your tax dollars. They want you angry at families getting food stamps, not the billionaires hiding money in offshore accounts or CEOs that refuse to pay their employees a living wage so they don't have to depend on welfare programs just to feed their children. So let's take a quick look at the numbers to debunk this conservative propaganda. In 2022, undocumented immigrants paid $96.7 billion in taxes. That's federal, state, and local taxes combined. Many Americans don't even realize that undocumented immigrants can and do pay taxes. They do this by using the Individual Taxpayer Identification Number, or ITIN. The IRS created the ITIN specifically for people who are required to file taxes but do not have a social security number. Take Sunil, a programmer from India. He was asked to come here by Microsoft to work on a project for 6 months. While he's here, he needs to pay his taxes, but he doesn't have a social security number. So Microsoft reports his earnings on a 1099 using his individual taxpayer identification number. This is the same process that is used for undocumented immigrants. Nearly 75% of all undocumented immigrants pay some form of taxes. Yet conservatives would have you believe that they are sucking up public resources and wasting your tax dollars. What about poor American citizens that rely on food stamps? Well, SNAP serves about 42 million Americans, and it costs taxpayers about $100 billion annually. That sounds like a lot until you realize that the average SNAP recipient only gets about $188 per month, or that's $6.20 per day to buy food. Polls show that 59% of Americans believe SNAP fraud is common because conservative media keeps saying there is so much waste, fraud, and abuse in the system. The fact is that the fraud rate is just 0.7%. Are you really mad at a person that gets $6 a day so they don't die of starvation? And if you're thinking to yourself, why don't they just get a job? Well, 2/3 of the people that benefit from SNAP are children. the elderly, or the disabled, so they can't work. That's why they're on SNAP. And if you look at able-bodied adults, 86% of them that are on SNAP already work. They just don't get paid enough to eat, and that's what democratic socialists want to solve. Conservative media is eager to tell you that if you add up all the welfare programs like SNAP, TAMP, and Medicaid, the cost is about $927 billion a year. And yeah, that does seem like a lot of money. But what conservatives never tell you is that when you add up all the corporate welfare programs like grants, loans, bailouts, and tax breaks, they add up to $220 billion a year. But the bigger story here is that if you look at tax evasion by the wealthy, that number, according to IRS estimates, is about $700 billion a year. So instead of telling you the truth, conservative media continuously pummels you with stories about the $927 billion in social welfare programs, but they never tell you about the $920 billion in tax evasion and corporate welfare programs for wealthy Americans. We have been conditioned to hate the words socialism, welfare, food stamps. The immediate gut reaction you just had when you heard me say those words out loud tells you how well conservative media has manipulated the national conversation. We shouldn't hate socialism, but it's the filthiest word in American politics. And for that, we have groups like the American Liberty League and people like Frank Luntz to thank. Who's Frank Luntz? Well, Frank Luntz is a longtime Republican pollster and communications consultant known for crafting language to sway public opinion, and he's very good at his job. In 2009, opponents of President Obama's healthcare reform bill, like Sarah Palin, seized on the phrase death panels to scare voters.
And I can see Russia from my house.
A phrase designed by Frank Luntz. See, in Europe, when someone starts getting older and they are told that they have a terminal condition like stage 3 or stage 4 lung cancer, doctors will sit down with them and their family and they'll have a rational discussion. In Europe, doctors and patients discuss any potential decrease to their quality of life prior to getting aggressive treatment like chemotherapy. Whereas in the United States, the priority isn't quality of life, it's prolonging life. What President Obama was trying to implement was a completely voluntary system where doctors were compensated for having these discussions ahead of time with patients and their families. Why should doctors be compensated for this? Because the current Medicare system awards hospitals and doctors nearly $430 billion a year in end-of-life care. 25% of all Medicare spending is spent on the last 12 months of someone's life. The European system is not only more humane, but also saves hundreds of billions of dollars. Personally, I can tell you that when my mom was dying of cancer, there was no one that talked to my family about what to do before it came time to make a decision. It was only when she was on her deathbed in a hospital room where we were given the option to put her on a breathing tube and let her live out the next few weeks or months on a machine with zero quality of life, or let her pass naturally on her own. She was not even conscious at this point, but this was the first time a doctor even raised the question with us. And it wasn't my father or my older sister that was the voice of reason. It was me that had to speak up and say she shouldn't be put on a tube. I had to make that decision at one of my most vulnerable moments in my life, right on the spot. And to this day, it was the worst moment in my entire life. That's what Obama was trying to resolve. But because Frank Luntz was so good at his job, the term death panels spread like wildfire, and Congress removed every provision regarding this voluntary program from the Affordable Care Act.
America, fuck yeah!
Frank Luntz was also responsible for changing the name of the estate tax to the death tax. Alien workers became illegal immigrants. Capitalism became the free market. Cutting SNAP benefits became personal responsibility. Raising the Social Security age became preserving Social Security. These aren't just words. They change how people feel about policy. There's a reason why Nebraska doesn't call their public utility program socialized energy, even though that's exactly what it is. You have been taught to fear socialism. We all have. The gut reaction so many Americans have when they simply hear this filthy, filthy word is the reason why it's so difficult to discuss how democratic socialism can make this country better for us all. The good news is that this mindset is slowly starting to change. 62% of Americans under 30 now say they have a favorable view of socialism. Millennials and Gen Z came of age during the 2008 financial crash. They watched housing costs explode, student debt skyrocket, and they're tired of working for Uber and DoorDash because the real job isn't giving them enough to pay the bills. The American dream no longer exists. That's why democratic socialists want to implement policies that help all Americans. And remember, democratic socialists don't want to get rid of capitalism, they want to enhance it and make it work for all of us. Here are the 5 most important policies that democratic socialists want to implement. Number 1. Enforce tax laws on the wealthy. It takes money to fund social programs. Democratic socialists don't want to increase taxes on the middle class. What we want to do is stop subsidizing the 1% and make sure they're paying their fair share. Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have proposed a plan that would impose a 2% annual tax on household net worth above $50 million, rising to 6% once that wealth exceeds $1 billion. This would only affect 0.06% of American families, but it would raise an estimated $2.7 trillion over the next decade. Number 2. Provide a pathway to work authorization for undocumented immigrants that are already here. This is actually the majority opinion. 78% of Americans want to find a way to make undocumented immigrants American citizens. Many people think that coming here legally is easy. If you're rich, it actually is pretty easy. But if you're poor, it's almost impossible. If you have immediate family that are American citizens, they can file an affidavit of support on your behalf, and it'll cost you about $2,000, but you can be here in about 5 years. But if you don't have any immediate family that are citizens, then it can take you over 20 years to come here legally. And that's what all the should have came here legally people don't understand. It takes literally 20 years. So democratic socialists want to make the undocumented that are already here legal. And we want to pass comprehensive immigration reform to make it easier for people to come here with legal work permits. This country depends on immigrants. We won't survive without them because the country's birth rate has fallen far below the level needed to replace our working population. Immigrants fill crucial gaps in the workforce, especially in industries like healthcare, construction, and agriculture. Without a steady flow of immigrants, the working age population would decrease dramatically, which means fewer people would be paying into systems like Social Security and Medicare. Without immigrants, nobody but the ultra rich would be able to retire, and eventually the economy would completely collapse. Number 3. Medicare for all. Even with the Affordable Care Act, there are still 38,000 preventable deaths that happen annually because people don't have access to health care. Additionally, even when people do have access to health insurance, they are still underinsured. That means their co-payments, deductibles, and non-covered prescription costs are so high that they can only use their insurance in emergency situations. This makes people less healthy, and it actually costs Americans more. Universal healthcare would save Americans between $2 trillion and $5 trillion over the next decade, compared to the current patchwork of healthcare systems we utilize today. It would also completely eliminate medical debt-related bankruptcy, which is the single largest cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States. In addition to saving lives and getting people the care they deserve, it would give people the freedom to change jobs without losing their health insurance, and it would actually help businesses as they would no longer have to be responsible for providing employer-based healthcare coverage. The only reason this hasn't happened yet is because insurance companies lobby politicians to the tune of $100 million a year just so they can continue to profit off the sick. Number 4. The $17 minimum wage. The proposed Raise the Wage Act would finally increase the $7.25 per hour rate that hasn't changed since 2009. The increase would be phased in incrementally over several years until it's reached its goal of $17 in 2030. It would also make the federal minimum wage automatically go up whenever the average pay across the country goes up. So we won't have to continually fight these fights in Congress year after year after year. It would simply be automatic. It also aims to eliminate the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. Right now, waiters and waitresses get $2.13 an hour, and the onus on paying these workers is actually on consumers. Now, interestingly enough, this practice became popular once slaves were freed. Employers would simply hire newly freed black people, but wouldn't actually give them a wage. Their income was solely dependent on tips that customers would pay them. We are essentially continuing the legacy of slavery by denying tipped workers a regular wage. Most of the world does not do this to their workers. Around the world, a tip is a true bonus given on top of their basic salary, and tips are nowhere as large as they are in the United States. And lastly, number 5, the Homes for All Act. Over the past 50 years, housing costs have exploded while paychecks haven't kept up at all. Back in the late 1960s, the average home cost Americans about 3 times what a typical family earned in a year. Today, it's nearly 6 times that amount. Democratic socialists want to introduce social housing. This means building high-quality homes that aren't controlled by profit-driven landlords or investors. Instead, they're publicly owned and meant to stay affordable forever. One of the main reasons why low-income housing hasn't worked in the past is because we segregated people by putting the lowest-income families in non-desirable areas. The idea here is to create mixed-income communities, about 40% of the units for extremely low-income families, 30% for low-income families, and 30% for middle-class incomes. These homes would be built to last with strong safety standards, energy efficiency, and climate-sustainable designs. Most importantly, it would finally end the rule that has blocked new public housing for decades, letting the federal government start building homes again instead of relying on local zoning boards, county commissions, and city councils, which often block affordable housing because wealthier neighborhoods fear it will lower property values. The federal government can override these restrictive local zoning rules when federal land or funds are used. Conservative propaganda has been manipulating you to think that Americans are so exceptional that pure capitalism is synonymous with freedom and liberty.
America! Fuck yeah!
That's just not true. I want the freedom to go see a doctor. I want the freedom to live in an affordable house. I want the freedom to be paid a fair wage. Democratic socialism isn't about getting rid of capitalism. It's about fixing it before the whole system collapses. Thanks for watching, and stick around and catch a couple of my other videos. I'm Brown Chubby Bear, and this is Political Bear Nation.